On today's show, we are going to be breaking down the 2024 draft haul as well as the overall prospect pool for the newly transferred Utah Hockey Club.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this show, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. I'm Sebastian High, the Director of European Scouting over at Dopper Prospects, typically joined by Hadi Kalakesh, who is still down with COVID at the moment. But we will be looking at the Utah Hockey Club today. But before we jump straight into the episode, today's show is brought to you by Indeed. Indeed knows when you are growing your own business, you have to make every single dollar count. That's why with Indeed, you only pay for quality applications that match your must-have job requirements. Visit Indeed.com/lockedon to start hiring now. Terms and conditions apply. All right, let's start off the show here by looking at the 2024 draft haul for the Utah Hockey Club. In the second segment, we will be breaking down the overall prospect pool by position and looking at what the pool still lacks, what they could still be adding in future drafts, as well as the overall pool grade. How strong is this overall prospect depth? And in the final segment, we'll be looking ahead at the 2024 and 2025 season, looking at which young players will need to take a step up, where Utah might be finishing in the NHL standings, especially with brand new acquisitions on the blue line with Mikhail Sergachev and John Marino. But before we look into that, let's look back at the 2024 NHL draft that happened just about 2 weeks ago in Las Vegas. And Utah went out and picked some really fun players on this day. And at 6th overall, they picked possibly my favorite player in the entire draft class in Tij Iginla. This is a player who is the best board battler that was eligible for that draft class. He has a wicked shot. He's a fantastic playmaker. His handling skill took strides in the last year, from an about average tool to a way above average one at the end of the season. He went from being a bit of a complementary offensive, high energy piece, playing bottom 6 minutes with the Seattle Thunderbirds on their big WHL run as a D-1, to being a top 6 or top line offensive driver for the Kelowna Rockets after an off-season trade. This is a guy who is highly intelligent. He's incredibly involved, really intense, very upbeat type of player off the ice, and very intense on the ice. The defensive effort is really high. The defensive reads still need a little bit of work, but this is an all-around player. He can make an impact in all 3 zones, on and off puck, whether his team is in control or playing defensively. He is a really solid player that I think Utah fans are going to adore as soon as he puts on that jersey for the first time. He probably has an NHL timeline of about a year, maybe year and a half or 2 years. He's pretty refined. He's one of the youngest players in this draft class as an August birthday, and I think he has a long runway to develop despite already being so polished in his game. This is a guy who could be a top line, offensive driver from the wing long term. I think he's a fantastic complement for a player like Logan Cooley, because he can do so much of that dirty work, along the boards. He can finish plays. He has a great shot. He's a strong playmaker as well. And he has this high level intelligence so that he can match the high end pace and the high-end problem-solving ability of those elite-level talents that are already in the organization, like Clayton Keller and Logan Cooley. I think it's a fantastic draft selection. It really is also an area of need that Utah addressed with this selection. And I think it's fantastic value at 6th overall. At 24th overall, they went out and selected Cole Baudouin, another player I'm a very big fan of, and for very different reasons. While he certainly lacks the upside that Tij Iginla holds, this is a big, athletic, two-way centerman who can lock things down defensively. He's really quite big at 6'2", well over 200 pounds. But it's his athleticism and his physicality that really stand out. He muscles players off pucks. He has excellent conditioning as well. He was deadlifting over 400 pounds in this past season. And he's a really great face-off winner on top of being a really intelligent defensive player. He's aggressive. He takes space and time away from the opposition. And in the offensive zone, he gets to the net front. He gets to the dirty areas. He's able to score goals in not the prettiest ways oftentimes. And he's not necessarily a dynamic offensive threat, but he plays the game the right way. And I think that this is a long-term number 3 centerman who can just lock down a third line and do a lot of that heavy lifting to create space and time for his line mates as well. I think a pairing of him and like a guy like Matias Michelli would be excellent in the long term. And I think it's great value at 24th overall to get a high potential or like a high likelihood number 3 centerman. In the second round, they went out and selected Will Scahan, a punishing 6'4" left shot defenseman out of the US NTDP. And while his decision-making is certainly, it lacks a degree of polish, and he's going to need to refine many aspects of his game, he has 4 years of college ahead of him to do so. And I think that while he's not an overly likely impactful NHL player, he's probably going to end up being at least a number 7 defenseman who can throw around the body. And that's certainly the profile that Utah and that scouting staff in Arizona previously has been targeting repeatedly, is big, punishing defensemen that can skate relatively well and do not shy away from their aggression. And I think that Scahan certainly fits the mold of what they value. In the third round, they picked 2 defensemen, very different profiles. A 6'4" right shot defenseman from the QMJHL and Thomas Lavoie. Again, very physical, quite a meat and potatoes type of player. Likes to take space and time away from opponents as well, but isn't going to wow you with the puck on his stick. I think there's still a lot of hesitation in his on-puck game, and you're not going to look to him to be like a real like breakout spark with a fantastic first pass, but he can make a solid first pass under pressure to his defensive partner and let that partner carry that burden in transition. They also picked Veeti Väisänen, a bit of a different profile, a 6'1", 180-pound left shot defenseman out of Finland, who's really intelligent in how he's able to leverage his mobility and his defensive habits to create small advantages. This is also a guy who has some room to grow in his transition game with that mobility, with that understanding of defensive structures. And while the offensive upside isn't the highest, which is why he was available at the end of the third round, there's a strong basis of mobility and defensive potential with this player. Just a very different kind of defensive potential from those physically punishing guys that they continue to select throughout this draft. Like with Gregor Bieber, an Austrian defenseman who is also 6'3", 187 pounds, still growing into that frame, but another big defenseman. They also picked Alice Czech in the third round, who is 6'3", 198 pounds, the left shot defenseman, and Ludwig Lafton, a 6'2", 187 pound left shot defenseman. So lots of defensemen entering the fray of the prospect pool here in the later rounds. A lot of players that are able to combine physicality, aggression, and mobility, which is clearly a profile that Utah likes a lot. But beyond that, they also picked 3 more forwards in this draft class. A 6'4" centerman out of the OHL and Gabe Smith, who didn't produce too much last season, about half a point a game, but is looking to grow on that this upcoming season and use his physicality to create more consistent offense. That'll be like the report card for him as a D+1 will be to more consistently leverage his frame at the net front to really create space for himself and for his teammates, and maybe work on his one-touch playmaking as well as a type of bumper type of player. And they also went out and picked Owen Allard, who stood out at the World Juniors last season for Team Canada. He was a surprising ad for many people at that tournament, but he scored a couple goals for Team Canada on that fourth line and really added a lot of intensity, a lot of physicality from that depth role. He's a guy who is a D+1, so an overage selection there in the 5th round, but is also quite intelligent. I like his off-puck movement. I ranked him as an honorable mention on my own personal board this year. I liked him quite a bit, even though there's been a bit of skepticism around the scouting community as to what really the NHL upside is with this player. I see a guy that could fill in on a 4th line, and in the 5th round, if you're landing a potential NHLer, you're getting pretty good value. And finally, in the 6th round, along with Ludvig Lofton, the Norwegian left shot defenseman, they also went out and picked Wojtek Hradec, a Czech forward who has a pretty good frame as well at 6'4" and 201 pounds. He was playing in the Czech U20 and the Czech Pro League last season. He scored 13 points in 12 games at the U20 level in the regular season, along with 9 points in 7 playoff games. And he also played 25 pro games with pretty limited minutes in the Pro League for Boleslav, where he scored a single goal in that span. So that wraps up the overall draft class for Utah, and a lot of interesting selections here. Quite a few big players that I haven't watched an incredible amount myself just yet. But I'm looking forward to seeing how this class can kind of age into itself. And I'm curious to see how these big bodies end up impacting the Utah lineup long term. This philosophy is going to clearly bleed into the actual NHL lineup in about 3 or 4 years' time. They've been on this trend for a couple seasons now, picking those really big players with impressive raw physical tools. But I think that as a whole, this draft class deserves about a B grade in my estimation. I love the 1st round. That is a clear elevating factor here, with Tij Iginla and Cole Baudouin really being strong forwards to add to the depth chart that also fill some areas of need. And while I personally would have targeted other defensemen in the spree of blue line selections, I'm very curious to see how these big bodies grow into their frames and are perhaps able to round out their habits and their overall reading of the game, which is, I think, for a lot of these guys, an area that needs some more development. But that wraps up this first segment. In the next one, we're going to be breaking down the overall prospect pool. But first, a quick word from our sponsors. We are driven for the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. It is to match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates extremely quickly. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging, and so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree that Indeed delivers the highest quality of matches compared to other job searching sites. One of the things that I have loved about Indeed in my personal use of it as an employee is how honest it is in wage and salary information. So many job sites hide that information from you, but Indeed makes a point of providing potential employees with that information, which immediately helps both employees and employers find those common matches. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's engine is constantly learning from your preferences, so the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide and use Indeed to hire great talent fast. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying that you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. You need to hire, you need Indeed. Alrighty, let's keep the episode rolling here in the second segment with the breakdown of the overall prospect pool there in Utah. We're going to go here position by position, going to look at some potential needs and areas of weakness in the prospect pool, as well as assigning an overall grade to the prospect pool as a whole. Let's start off at forward. The biggest name here is their recent 6th overall selection in Tij Iginla. Obviously, players like Logan Cooley and Dylan Gunther have already made that leap to the NHL, so Tij Iginla is the guy here in the forward pool. As I mentioned in the previous segment, this is a player that projects incredibly well as a high-end NHL piece. I think he's a high likelihood top 6 player with a real good shot at being a contributor on a top line and a real Swiss Army knife at that, playing in all 3 zones, on and off puck, being intense, being physical, being a goal scoring and playmaking threat, and overall playing with pace and intensity with the puck on the stick as well. And that's something that Utah could definitely add into their lineup with what they've been missing in recent seasons. And I think he's going to be a fantastic fit in this lineup in no time at all. They also have Daniil But, the 11th overall selection from last season, the big, hulking, goal-scoring winger out of Russia, who was scoring quite a few goals in professional hockey this past season in Russia. And he has a wicked shot, really good puck handler, and he's learning to integrate playmaking into his deceptiveness to really also open up some shooting lanes for himself, as well as to combine that handling and playmaking ability to use his reach to get around defenses, to hook passes around bigger and rangy defensemen at the professional level and get the puck to dangerous areas. He still has a lot of refinement to do in his game. He's still quite raw. The skating could still use some work. The defensive implication could still use some work, but the raw tools continue to be really, really impressive with this player. They also have Josh Doan, the son of Shane, who made his NHL debut this past season, and he was scoring and he scored a fair few points at the NHL level, logging 8 points in 11 NHL games. This is a player with a really good shot who's been consistently scoring more goals and assists at the NHL level and the AHL level and the NCAA level. He just consistently scores goals, which is something that you always like to see, even though that playmaking game could still use a bit more refinement with time. I'm expecting him to be an NHL player this upcoming season and potting a couple goals along the way. Julian Lutz is a really physical and intense checking winger who projects as a third-line piece, and curious to see how he makes the leap to professional hockey in North America. Cole Baudouin, as we were just talking about, could be a really good third-line center in just a couple years' time, and will continue to develop in the OHL with the Barrie Colts, and also have a leadership role with that team, as he already wore an A on his jersey as a draft year player. Noel Nord is a really interesting winger out of Sweden with a good degree of handling skill as well as a pretty big frame. And he combines that frame, that size, that physicality with the skill and the soft areas of his game really, really nicely. While he lacks that top 6 upside and that true dynamic quality, he could be a solid bottom 6 contributing offensive guy. And if he can grow his defensive game, I think his fallback game as a bottom 6er will entrench itself as very likely. Beyond him, you still have some depth pieces like Sam Lipkin, who's having a really solid NCAA career at Quinnipiac, Mikko Matika, who just signed his NHL entry-level contract after a strong freshman season in the NCAA with the University of Denver. The newly acquired Yegor Sokolov could really bring a good depth goal-scoring punch to that lineup. I wouldn't be surprised if he has an impact similar to that of Michael Carcone. Obviously, a very different frame as well. This is a hulking scoring winger, but he's been a solid AHL piece in Belleville for the past couple seasons, and I've been waiting for him to get a consistent NHL shot for a couple years now. And last but not least, at forward, we still have Owen Allard, that pesky, high-motor, potential fourth-line piece that they added in the 5th round this year. Switching our perspective over to the defensive core, we have some really fun players here as well, like Dmitry Simashev, the smooth skating left shot defenseman who's able to combine a high degree of intelligence with fantastic physical tools. He's strong, he's mobile, he's intelligent, he takes space and time away from opponents. He's one of my personal favorite defensive prospects to watch that have yet to make their NHL debuts, and I think that combining him with guys like Maverick Lamoureux and Artyom Duda long-term is going to make for a very physical and imposing and mobile defensive core in Utah. Duda is a player that I was a bit surprised was selected at 33rd overall 2 seasons ago out of Russia, but He's progressed decently well. I still have some question marks about the overall top 4 upside here, but Maverick Lamoureux has really progressed nicely since his draft year season. He was not a guy I would have personally selected in the first round, but that's where he went, and he is able to really combine that long reach, the range. He's 6'7", and with that physicality, the intelligence, and the handling skill as well. This is a really unicorn style of player, a profile that we don't see come along very often, and he could be a very entertaining second pairing piece in the long term. They also added Thomas Lavoie at this draft class, as we were talking about, the big right shot defenseman out of the QMJHL at 6'4" and 223 pounds, as well as Veti Weissman and Will Skahan. Gregor Bieber, Alice Czech, and Maximilian Zuber round out this overall defensive core. Zuber specifically is a player that I've been really quite interested in. He's a 20-year-old German defensive prospect who has been playing pretty good hockey at the professional level in Germany, and I think that he could progress really quite nicely for Utah in the coming seasons. At goaltender, you also have a couple more prospects that are worth mentioning. Obviously, Michael Hrabal is the gem of this prospect pool in net. He's a massive 6'6" goaltender who moves really athletically, still trying to refine his overall reading of the game, because there's still some habits in there that aren't overly refined, and we've seen that with inconsistent play in the past year with him. But overall, this is a player who's looking to still round out his game in the NCAA, but could be a really intriguing starting caliber NHL goaltender in about 2 to 3 years' time. Carson Musser and Rasmus Korhonen also deserve mentions in net, and while they probably lack real starter upside, they could be 1B or backup quality players in about 4 or 5 years' time when their development rounds out, but it's still going to need a little bit of development over that course. Overall, I still think that there are some areas of need in this prospect pool. Specifically, a dynamic top 6 forward, I think, still needs to be added into the mix. Yes, you already have Clayton Keller and Logan Cooley, Dylan Gunther. I think adding one more player to that equation who can also bring a big frame to the equation would be really quite helpful. I'm not overly convinced that Daniel Boot is going to be that guy, but clearly the Utah scouting staff believes in that, so we'll see how he continues to develop. I also think that adding a puck-moving defenseman, especially on that right-hand side of defense, would be really quite useful. Mikhail Sergachev is going to lock down the top 4 on the left side long-term, but I don't really see Sean Dursey or John Marino being a top pairing caliber right shot defenseman long-term, and I don't really see anyone in the prospect pool that projects as that piece. And I also think that adding a couple more goaltenders into that prospect pool depth will be quite useful, because I still have some doubts around Musser and Korhonen specifically. Overall, this prospect pool deserves a B grade in my opinion. Many of the quality players have already made the leap to the NHL. They also just traded away Connor Geekie in that Mikhail Sergachev deal. But overall, I still think there's a lot of quality here, especially in the top end, with Dmitry Simashev and Tij Iginla and Michael Hrabal headlining each position in quality. But that wraps up the second segment. In the final one, we're going to delve into the 2024-25 season, looking at some potential expectations, hopes, and projections for the overall Utah Hockey Club team in that season. Alrighty, let's wrap up this episode here, delving into the Utah Hockey Club's prospect pool. I think that one very important area for this upcoming season will be for the young guns and the newly acquired defensemen to really take a step and take the reins of that team to lift it out of the bottom 8 where they found themselves perennially in recent years. I think that Sergachev is going to have a really big impact as long as he's able to stay healthy for Utah, being able to munch minutes, play on the penalty kill and power play alike, and also ease the burden a little bit off of Sean Dursey's back to be the primary offensive producer from the blue line. Alongside him, you have John Marino, who's a bit of a different style of player, a shutdown, mobile, defensive specialist who's able to also eat big minutes, but mainly just play those big penalty kill minutes as well, which I think is certainly addressing an area of need that defensive core was lacking last season. Beyond that, you have the young, dynamic forward core. Logan Cooley, Matthias Michelli, Dylan Gunther, maybe even Josh Doan could be scoring forwards in a top 9 or top 6 role this upcoming season. I'd love to see guys like Logan Cooley jump in production in their sophomore seasons. I could see Cooley scoring 25 goals and 65 points this year if things go well for him. And I'd love to see Dylan Gunther hit that 30 goal mark this season, because in the NHL minutes he saw last year, he was lethal. And it felt like every single time I tuned into a Coyotes game that Gunther was putting the puck in the back of the net, I could see him scoring 30 goals and 65 points this season if things continue to go well in his development, as well as Matthias Michelli, one of my favorite playmakers in the NHL. He's so much fun to watch. He's so creative. He's so intelligent, and he's able to combine the skill with deception to really make things happen, even from the perimeter, as a high-end playmaker. If he can hit the 60-goal mark as well this season, maybe 20 goals and 40 assists in that point projection, I think that Utah would have a pretty good chance of contending for at least the last wild card spot in that Western Conference. Clearly, the Eastern Conference is a bit stronger than the West is at the moment, and I think that could maybe open the door for Utah to take a step and maybe surprise some people with a playoff berth. I think that Josh Doan could also hit the 20-goal mark if he's playing full-time in the NHL this season. We'll see if that happens or not, but if it does, I think a 20-goal, 35-point season would not be a bad expectation to have. And Barrett Hayton, the player who just recently signed a 2-year extension there in Utah, could also hit the 15-goal and 40-point mark. I think that these young players taking steps forward in their development is crucial in Utah really contending for that potential playoff berth, which they've been vying for so many years at this stage. And I think that a key part of that will also just be giving them trust to make mistakes continuously. We've seen that in past season, giving the reins to young players and allowing them to make mistakes. And I'm hoping that same can be said in this first season for the Utah Hockey Club. There will be hopes and expectations in that market for that team to take a step, especially with the trades they were able to make at the draft. But I'd love to see that level of trust in young players be repaid in higher end production and in leaps taken in development. We're also going to see this team have an influx of young talent in about a year or two, especially with guys like Tij Iginla and Dmitry Simashev being potential impact players. The back-to-back 6th overall draft selections could be like franchise-changing types of players that figure in on a top pairing and a top line long-term. And I think that they are also the styles of players that hockey fans are going to adore watching night in, night out, bringing a combination of intelligence, high-end physical tools, and flair to the equation, especially with Sergachev being able to teach Simashev the reins at the NHL level when Simashev does make that transition to North America. I think that you're going to have a really interesting big Russian combination down that left side of defense. But that wraps up this episode for us here at Locked On NHL Prospects. If you're watching on YouTube, please leave us a comment. Let us know which players in this prospect pool you are most excited by, what your expectations are for the young studs already in the NHL lineup for Utah, what your thoughts were about those big trades on draft day, and which players I may have missed mentioning in this episode. With a 30-minute show, I can only talk about so many guys, and I'd love to hear from the Utah fans specifically, or former Arizona Coyotes fans, which players may be under the radar quality prospects in this pool here. But if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, head over to Locked On Sports Today, a 24-hour-a-day news stream with all the news you could possibly want to have access to within the sporting world. We'd love to also hear from you everydayers, what you want us to cover in this offseason. We've got a long offseason ahead of us. Obviously, a big series here, breaking down every single team's prospect pool, but please always leave us suggestions. We would love to hear from you. But that wraps things up here for us at Locked On NHL Prospects. I'm Sebastian High, Director of European Scouting over at Dauber Prospects, typically joined by Hadi Kalakesh, who is still out with illness. But thank you so much for tuning in, and we hope that you tune back in later on this week.